question about literature for a change. You have done a lot to revitalize epic fantasy, and along with other writers such as Steve Erickson, introduce the point of view technique, unreliable narrator, unclear history, and so on. And my question is about the future of this epic point of view fantasy. What do you think will be the future of this subgenre?
Well, I'm very encouraged about the future of epic fantasy right now. I think we have an amazing amount of writers who are, sort of taking the torch and carrying it forward. People like Scott Lynch with his Lies of Locke Lamora series, Patrick Rothfuss with his Gothe series, Daniel Abraham, my friend Daniel Abraham, and sometimes collaborator, who's just started with The Dragon's Path, his new Dagger and the Coin series. Some amazing stuff. Joe Abercrombie, who's coming out with every book is better than the last one, and many people whose names I haven't mentioned here. I could go on for quite a while. There's a lot of exciting new epic fantasy coming down the pike. And the most encouraging thing to me about this is they're not imitating Tolkien. I always kind of feel conflicted when I talk about Tolkien, because I don't want to be categorized as being one of these Tolkien bashers. I mean, Tolkien is probably my favorite writer. I reread Lord of the Rings every few years. He created fantasy, epic fantasy, in its modern sense. Yes, there was fantasy before Tolkien, but he changed the genre completely and thoroughly. And from the time that Lord of the Rings really took off in the 60s, and from the time the first imitations came out in the 70s, his shadow has dominated the field. And there have been so many writers who've been writing epic fantasy, Tolkien-esque epic fantasy, all of which has to do with the Dark Lord is stirring, and the Dark Lord's stirring place. And he's raising up some ugly people who are going to come and eat us all and burn our cities. And all of the dwarfs and the elves and the little grumpkins have to get together to stop him. And it was brilliant when Tolkien did it, but after the 999th time, you're sick of the Dark Lords, and no one has done it even remotely as good as Tolkien. So could you please stop doing it? And finally we have a generation of fantasies who are doing it. I mean, you read something about the Lies of Locke Lamora, and there's no Dark Lord, and there's no, consternation in the villages of the Grumpkins. It's about a con man, and he's in a fantasy setting. It's an imaginary second kingdom. And yes, there's a vanished elder race that's built some things, but mostly it's about this con man who's trying to make his way in the underworld of this fantasy city, and him and his friends, and they're trying to run a con on some rich nobles, and they get in trouble. They fight over more than they can chew, and there's supernatural aspects. And when I first read that 4 or 5 years ago, it was so refreshing, because there was no Dark Lord, and it was great, And similarly, Joe Abercrombie is, all of these people I've mentioned are doing their own takes on fantasy and taking it in new directions. And in that sense, they're experimenting. And some of the experiments will succeed, and some of the experiments will fail. But that's true of any kind of literature. And so I think fantasy, epic fantasy, has a bright future ahead of it. And this is an exciting time to be doing it. It does feel strange to see people's books labeled as being in the tradition of George R. Martin. After all these decades where everything was in the tradition of J.R.R. Tolkien. Sometimes they're books that I like, and sometimes not so much. They don't consult you when they decide who's in your traditions. So that's been interesting. But I'm very encouraged about fantasy.
Thank you very much.